There were actually 14 escape attempts, and
14 escape attempts.
probably at least two of them were successful. In 1945, one guy actually swam to Fort Point, which is 2 miles away, and he arrived on the rocks severely hypothermic, so he was captured easily. But he technically escaped from Alcatraz and made it to the mainland. And then there was another fellow who was working in the laundry, and he decided he would steal pieces of uniforms and put them together. And one day he put on a sergeant's uniform and just walked down to the pier, got on the launch, thought he was going to San Francisco, but that launch went to Angel Island, and his absence was discovered, and he was apprehended. But technically, he got off the island as well. And of course, there's the famous Escape from Alcatraz group, the Anglin brothers, and Morris, I think his name was, portrayed by Clint Eastwood. There's a lot of people who believe they got off the island as well. So,
well, since we're discussing this, why don't we just jump into that? Because I want to talk about this in depth, and also want to talk about the hauntings and a few of the more famous prisoners. But when you go to Alcatraz, you go to the cell block and you see their actual cells. Now, when I got back that day, I watched Escape from Alcatraz. Now, obviously, if you're a child of the 70s or love movies or whatever, that was still the coolest name, Escape from Alcatraz. And the poster was great. It was Clint Eastwood at his toughest, and it tells the whole tale. And they filmed that in Alcatraz because those cells and where we were, the yard and all that stuff, we had just been there hours earlier. So just discuss that, Casey, and Jeff as well, how this came to play. And let's talk in detail about the guys and where they got the idea and all that other stuff.
Yeah, I could jump in, and then Jeff, you can jump in and support this. But I actually truly believe they did get off that island. There's an incredible documentary. I've watched a lot of documentaries of Alcatraz, being somebody that's into the island and grew up here. But the one that I think was the best was called Alcatraz Search for the Truth. And the family of the Anglin brothers actually worked with the Marshal Service. They coordinated for the first time ever to try to put their evidence together and figure out what really happened. And they believe those guys got off that island. And they even had a photo of them in Brazil that a FBI facial recognition expert said, he was retired at the time when he looked at it, but he said it without 99% certainty it was them in Brazil 30 years after they escaped the island. What I believe they did.
We're putting the cart before the horse. How did they get off the island in the first place? Then I want to go into detail on why you think they actually made it. So let's talk about the guys.
So what we looked at was they had the heads, obviously they put in the beds. We saw that. What they did was they spent 15 years planning this escape. And so for me, if you spend 15 years planning escape, you better believe they had a plan for what they were going to do when they hit the water. So they said that they were painters and they were painting pictures of their girlfriends. They used that to get flesh-colored paint. They worked in the barber shop to get hair clippings. They stole materials like that they used to make life jackets in a boat. They stole an electrical cord that they used to tow themselves out, and they chiseled their way through the vents. So they had meticulously planned this thing over 15 years so that they could make their move when they had the opportunity to.
Jeff, who were these guys?
Well, these guys are the Anglin brothers, of course. They're pretty well known. And then the other guy was Frank Morris, and he was the mastermind of this, and he's the character that Clint Eastwood played in the movie. And they spent a lot of time, as you said, putting together this raft. They made it out of raincoats and other rubber gear they could swipe from the shops, and stored it up in the rafters over their cell block. And it's amazing that the guards didn't suspect what was going on up there. In fact, some people think the guards were actually paid off to ignore what was going on. And on the right night, they got up there in the top of the cell block and went through a vent in the roof, went across the roof and climbed all the way down to the shore and got in the water, and supposedly made it to Angel Island, and from there probably stole the boat and made it to Marin County. A lot of people think that they might have just drowned in the bay. In fact, a lot of the early suspicion was that they just succumbed to hypothermia, because usually anybody who went into that bay with just clothes on, no wetsuit, would become hypothermic very soon. What people don't realize is they built a raft so their torso was above the water. They were in the water only from about the hip joints down so they could kick and propel the raft. And if you're doing that, you could probably make it to Angel Island. It's probably about 1.2 miles, something like that. It's not that far. And if you have a proper current, you could make it. So I don't think hypothermia is something that got to these guys. That's why I think they probably made it to Angel Island. Plus, remnants of the raft were found on the island as well.
Casey, what were you going to say?
Yeah, there's more to it, Jeff. In what they figured is everything you said is exactly right. But what they did when they hit the water is they didn't use the raft to paddle across the ocean like many people thought. What they did was they used it to traverse just the perimeter of the island. And they had some scent dogs down there, and they actually detected their scent both where they hit the water and at another part of the island by a cave. So the belief is they traversed just the perimeter of the island until they could get underneath the dock where the ferry, the last ferry out for the night. Because remember, Chris, as we were talking about, you had to boat everything on and off the island, and that included staff and guards. So they found an actual ferry schedule in their cell. So the belief is they traversed the perimeter of the island, got under the dock. They had found that they had stolen an electrical cable that was over 100 feet long. The belief is they tied that to the last ferry out, used the ferry to tow themselves out to sea, so they didn't even have to paddle. And then they got picked up by a boat that was floating out in the ocean. They had a friend who was a smuggler. He told this story to the Anglin family on tape. And the boat was sitting there waiting for them in the dark. And an off-duty police officer on the shore actually spotted a boat that night floating between Alcatraz and the shore. So there is some evidence to back that up. But the belief is, yes, they got towed out. Then they got picked up, and then they got flown off to South America, smuggled off the.
I don't buy that one.
Well, let me say something here, and the reason why that I think it's very difficult. So I have a house on a lake, and when my kids were little, everybody loved to be pulled on a tube, right, on the jet ski. If you didn't blow that tube up to maximum level to where it was sitting right on top of the water, when you started off slow, it would go down. All the kids would fall off. So you'd have to gun it and go fast, and it would have to have a lot of air in it. So if these guys are just blowing it up by themselves, how buoyant would it be for the ferry to just take them right away? They would be drowning under the water almost, as it pulls it.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you've ever been towed behind a boat, that's exactly what happens. Plus, a lot of these launches were going at least 8 to 10 knots, and that's a lot of water flowing by you and holding on to an electrical cable for the several minutes it would take. I just think that's not a very plausible theory. I'm not saying it couldn't happen,
right?
But it's not very plausible to me.